The September 26, 2011 meeting of the Agenda Charter Committee will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Barker? Here. Mr. Eckel? Here. Mr. Esposito? Here. Mr. Howland? Here. Chairman Yulovich?
Here. Is there anyone signed up for the public forum?
There are. When I call your name, please come forward to the podium. You will have 2 minutes and only 2 minutes in which to address the committee. Please conclude when the buzzer sounds. Thank you. Our first speaker is Peter Stoller.
Thank you for the time to speak on this issue. My name is Peter Stoller. I'm with the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors. I'm here to speak on the proposed Homebuyer and Renter Notification Act. Our organization strongly opposes this legislation, and before I go into our reason why we oppose, let me first say that our organization was a lead advocate in closing a loophole at the state level with the Division of Licensing that had previously allowed convicted registered sex offenders to obtain a real estate license and in effect have access to people's homes via the lockbox. So protecting families from the potential threats that exist with registered sex offenders is an issue that is near and dear to our hearts. However, we support the intent of this legislation. We do not support the avenue that it takes to accomplish the intent. There are many technical aspects within the legislation when reviewing raised more questions and concerns and confusion to the real estate process and transaction than we had answers. And for the sake of time, I've outlined them for the committee members in my handout that you'll be receiving after the meeting. One of the big issues that we oppose this legislation is that it fails to address all members in the real estate transaction. It uses the real estate agent as the key component to implement the notification. However, for individuals, whether buying or renting, don't utilize the services of a real estate agent, they will not be notified. The city of Rochester is is just roughly over 1/3 owner occupied, which means nearly 2/3, the greater majority of the city population is rental. Real estate owners that choose to rent do not typically in our market use real estate agents, and that's a large portion of our population that will not be protected under the intent of this legislation. So for that reason and more issues that I've outlined in our materials that members of the committee will be receiving, we oppose this legislation. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Richard Burrell.
I would like to thank for getting the honor to be here. This has been a project of mine for 6 years. Almost 7. I moved here from Cuco Lake and we bought a house in Irondequoit, and that was 6 months before we were aware that there was a sex offender living in the neighborhood. I called the police department. They told me how to find out, and I did, and he lived next door to me. Did 7 years in prison for sodomy. It scared the hell out of me, if I could say it bluntly, and my daughter, who has a young son who had been around all these 6 months, it bothered her dramatically, and it came to me that there is no system whatsoever anywhere that tells anybody moving into a house anywhere that there is a sex offender living in their neighborhood. I got a lot of answers that we inform them. That's not true. You inform people already living there. Once they move out and someone moves in, they're told nothing. I talked to every politician I could think of, and I finally found one, Mr. Esposito, who took some action on it. It took me two years to get him to do it. But he did it, and I'm really glad he did, because I think it's something that has to be done. It's not, let's not think about it, let's do it. I had one supervisor tell me, well, I can't do it because I wouldn't know for 2 weeks which houses were sold. I said, well, what's 2 weeks compared to never? You know, these are all weak arguments about the bill. It has to be done. It's not if it isn't perfect and the realtors find some faults with it, let's get the bill done and change it. We got a constitution that's got an awful lot of amendments to it, and that's served us well. And any bill can do the same for us. Let's get the thing going and get the bill passed, and I urge everybody to take it into their mind to pass this bill, because I think it's a necessity, not just something I'm dreaming of. I don't know how many sex offenders there are in the neighborhood. I don't know how you find out. And I just think that, I heard the man say about the rental people. All these rental places, other than basic homes, they're commercial enterprises. When they rent, why can't this be part of their information furnished to renter? I mean, these are just little things that I think you can nitpick this bill till time immemorial, but it has to be done, and I thank you again. I'm going to go 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
Is there anyone present who has not signed up to speak who would like to address the committee at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. You have the August 22nd, 2011 minutes before you. They will stand approved unless the clerk is notified of any changes by the end of the day. Next item on the agenda is new business. Madam Clerk.
Referral 11-213, restoring accountability to the Monroe County budget.
Moved by Legislator Esposito, seconded by Legislator Eckel. Is there any discussion? Legislator Esposito.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is a proposal that I think should be familiar to most people in this committee and in this body. It's something we've discussed before, but it's something that has still not been resolved. It's a very simple proposal. All we're saying is that we want to move the date with which the county executive is required to provide this body and the public with the proposed county budget. Currently, as of, I think, 2006, the county executive is allowed to propose it after Election Day, which we think is a poor law by this body to have allowed, simply because it allows for the opportunity to abuse the public trust with regards to accountability and transparency. The county executive's record during this administration shows very clearly that extra time, which I believe was the reason for moving the county submission date back 5 years ago, is not needed. I think there's only been 2 occasions where the budget was submitted after Election Day, so more often than not, the budget has been prepared and able to be prepared well in advance of that. If anyone needs more time with the county budget, it's not the professional budget staff of the administration that has it for 11 months to craft. It's the public and this body which need to go through it and decide if it's the appropriate fiscal plan for the taxpayers. So for that reason, and that reason alone, this body, the legislative branch, should be interested in having more time with the budget, not less. On top of that, this year it's even more important because of the unique circumstances we're facing with regards to the loss of federal stimulus dollars that we've had for the last 3 years to help close our budget deficit, and also the brand new property tax cap enacted by New York State that will affect next budget. These are reasons that this body needs to deliberate with the budget longer, not shorter. And so for that reason, I'd like to propose this move of the submission date back to the October cycle, not the November cycle, which would give this body 2 months to deliberate, modify, and approve the budget. It's something that's done in almost every single county in New York State that has an elected county executive, because it's the right thing to do, to be upfront with taxpayers and to show the public what it is we're planning to do before they have to choose their elected representatives, which we all are. This has been a bipartisan vote in the past. There's been Republicans and Democrats who think it's the right thing to do. I hope that continues in this committee today, and I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any other discussion? Legislator Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I voted in favor of moving the budget deadline back when it was originally proposed, and after having lived through it the number of years that we have, I don't see a reason to move that. I think Legislator Esposito makes a great point about when he talks about the budget and with the property cap tax and all those as reasons that the budget staff needs to the last as much information as they can before they give us a budget back. Having served on town councils and village boards and voted on budgets there and in this body beforehand, too much guesswork leads to problems along the way. And I voted in favor of moving the budget deadline to November, however many years ago it was, and I still think it was the right thing to do. So I will be voting against this proposal.
Any further discussion? All those in, Legislator Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to make one final point that I think everyone is aware of or should be aware of, and that is that there are other counties of comparable size in New York State, Nassau, Suffolk, and Onondaga to our east, to name a few, that have already proposed their budgets for the coming year, even with the questions that exist over the property tax cap. And proposing the budget does not mean that the county executive or the budget staff is unable to modify it during the legislative process in the deliberations that would occur within the public realm and within this body. So I appreciate how difficult a task it might be to prepare a budget, but I don't think 2 months to deliberate about a budget in this body is too much to ask when the budget staff has, like I said, 11 months now to prepare it. So I just wanted to make that final point that we're not alone. Other counties are struggling with the unique aspects we're dealing with this year, and as one who's elected to deal with the county's finances, I'm anxious to see what we have and how we're going to deal with the property tax cap and the lack of stimulus dollars. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Opposed. Motion fails. Next referral.
Referral 11-215, notification of sex offender registry to home buyer and renters.
Moved by Legislator Esposito, seconded by Legislator Eckel. Any discussion? Legislator Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank both speakers today. Both of them are men I've spoke to many times in the last few weeks about this proposal, and as Mr. Burrow alluded, many times in the last few years about this proposal. This is something I've thought about for a while. And the proposal before us tonight, in my mind, fills a gap in the law known as Megan's Law, the New York State law that requires people convicted of sexual crimes to register with the state and be subject to public disclosure about their whereabouts and where they live in our communities. That law, Megan's Law, allows law enforcement and municipalities to disclose that information to residents in the communities where registered sex offenders live. And law enforcement agencies and school districts in particular in Monroe County do a terrific job of that notification. And it's important to note that it's just notification for level 2 and level 3, the most extreme or most violent sex offenders in our community, not necessarily level 1 sex offenders that might be convicted of what we might call lesser offenses. They do a great job of this. However, when Mr. Burrow brought this to my attention, I started researching the issue to realize there is a glaring omission, and that is when someone looks to move into a home or rent a home, whether they're purchasing or renting, there's no mechanism for them to be told if there's a sex offender next door the same way they would have to be told if there was mold in the basement or asbestos in the woodwork or the ceiling or the attic. And that seemed fundamentally wrong to me. There is a great debate about the benefit or effectiveness of sex offender registries. That's not necessarily what this proposal is about, but rather this is about how the information is disseminated to the public. And it came down to a decision where I knew if I was to move my family that I would want to be informed of any potential risks to my family that might be in the area. So I decided I wanted to work on this issue and put forth a proposal. And I was trying to figure out how best to do that. It is not my intention or desire to have put a burden of notification onto a real estate agent. And I recognize that in instances, if this proposal were to pass, of people who buy a home or rent a home without an agent, that there would be no additional notification. But unfortunately, given that I wanted the notification to occur before someone made a decision on where they might move to or where they might live and not after, there was no way to escape the fact that our real estate professionals are the ones who are involved in that process. And they have a bunch of requirements as to how they do their job that include a lot of disclosure up front when they go in to begin the real estate transaction process with a particular or prospective buyer or seller. When I first looked at this, my thought was, let's make this very black and white. Let's make it a requirement that if you want to sell your home, you have to tell somebody that next door is a sex offender the same way you'd have to tell somebody if you had mold damage in your basement. I quickly realized through conversations with the state and local realtor associations that that was not only an unfair way to go about it, but it also violated existing New York State case law, which does not allow the burden of disclosure of sex offender's location to fall on a seller or a particular seller's agent. Because quite frankly, you can't control who lives next door to you, and that wouldn't be fair. And so I made it, I think, less burdensome and more flexible by putting it back to the buyer, which is what in New York State we have a buyer beware statute that governs real estate transactions and a lot of retail transactions. And recognizing that ultimately it's the buyer's responsibility, this law would simply add a level of notification during a process with which a real estate professional is already required to disclose information about their role, to tell that person that they're entering into an agreement with that there is also this resource out there that is a big part of the buying and renting process for deciding where you're going to live, and that they should take advantage of it and use it to protect them and their family. The information exists. It doesn't expand upon the information that is required to be disclosed. It just reminds them that they should use it. And I think that's a very important step. And regardless of what this committee does today, I hope that the discussion that's already occurred and the debate that's ensuing about this will at least raise awareness for people who might be looking to move into these communities or move around our community, that this resource exists, this online database of sex offender registry, and that it be used more frequently, because that's what it's there for, and I believe it's a good thing. So for those reasons, and that's sort of the background on how we got to this point, I'd encourage my colleagues to pass this legislation to make it an extra step in the real estate transaction process, that buyers be notified of the sex offender registry, and that they be put the burden on them, the buyer, to check it to help protect them and their families. I think that covers the basics, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer questions or engage in more discussion about the proposal, but I encourage my colleagues to pass it today.
Is there any other discussion? Legislator Eckel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add, when my wife and I bought our home, when we were buying our home, we were given tons of information, lots of information. Where to find inspectors to check out the house, where to find, X, Y, and Z, where to go and get financing, where to get pre-registered for this, for that, the other. This is just yet another resource that we need to give the home buyer for them to make an informed decision. If I'm going to make an informed decision about my chimney, I also want an informed decision about my children and their safety. I don't think this is very burdensome, if you will, to be provided with a document that states that there are these registries that are available to us. We also have to get documents on lead paint, etc., other things like that. We're protecting ourselves, and we're helping to protect the buyer. But again, as it comes down to, the burden is on the buyer to go and look at that registry. I don't think it's very burdensome to be offered this or to have a real estate agent hand me documentation saying that, yes, these registries are available to us and are out there. Having rented a long time before that, we were never made aware of this, that there was this registry. When we bought a home, we found out afterwards that this registry was available. I would have liked to have known when we were buying our home. Thank you very much.
Is there any other discussion? Well, both for Legislator Esposito.
Thank you. Just a couple of points I wanted to mention. First is, similar to my follow-up comment last time, there are other states that do similar things like this. This is something that in the Megan's Law realm of state law that is expanding the notification for new home buyers. And I also wanted to point out that with regards to the technical deficiencies that the Realtors Association representative mentioned in his comments, those are things I have offered to continue to work on and have changed previous drafts before it was submitted. But it was also written in a way to be, like Steve said, the least burdensome and the most flexible. I did not want to dictate exactly the type of form or the wording that would be required by a real estate professional to provide a client. I wanted to give them the flexibility to do that in the measure that they feel was the least burdensome on how they do their business. In fact, most real estate professionals, particularly realtors in this area, have buyer agreements already. This would be very easy to add as a provision that would be one of, I think I have about 14 or 15 already in there, something that you'd have to initial and discuss whenever you enter an agreement with potential buyers. So to that point about how burdensome this might be in the day-to-day activities of the real estate transaction, I think that's reasonable for this enhanced measure of public safety. So those are things I just wanted to mention that I had forgotten. Thank you.
Any other further discussion? Well, you both made very good points, and I certainly agree with some of them. But there's also some negatives involved here too. So we don't know if it's completely legal to do this. There's a lot of questions that arose when I spoke to Mr. Stoller privately, and then I read through your referral also. I'm going to refer this to administration. I'm not going to vote it down. I'm going to refer it to the administration. I think it needs to be looked at by someone a little bit more legally inclined than I am. So that, as far as I'm concerned, that would end it right there, or at least until we get an answer from them. So, Jerry, we'll be referring this to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think gathering from your comments, the most appropriate action would be to refer this to the law department to review it for some of the legal questions that have been raised and some of the other concerns that have been raised from a legal point of view.
Are there any, Legislator Eckel?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. Could we have a potential date to receive an answer back?
Mr. Chairman, I would anticipate no more than 2 cycles. It's sort of consistent with past referrals of the administration, just to make sure we have enough time to give it a thorough review.
Thank you.
Are there any other matters to come before this committee? There being no further business, the September 26, 2011 meeting of the Agenda Charter Committee stands adjourned. The next meeting of the Agenda Charter Committee is scheduled for Monday, October 24th, 2011 at 5:30 p.m.